Mike, so I know we've done this before, but still, like, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. I'm Mike Young. My current roles are as the owner and director of performance for athleticlab Sports Performance Training Center, as well as the director of performance for the North Carolina Courage, a women's soccer club, football club. Uh, I have a background in coaching and sports science. My educational background has me with a master's in coaching science, an undergrad, and a PhD minor in physiology and a PhD in biomechanics, and have worked as a sports scientist with a couple published papers in a variety of different subjects. I've primarily worked, however, as a coach and a performance director over the years in a variety of sports, most notably in soccer, as well as track and field. Track and field is my athletic roots, where I was a track and field athlete and then coached at LSU, where we won several national championships, and as well as a couple other universities. And then I've subsequently gone on to coach a couple national champions, international competitors, world championship competitors, Olympic competitors in a variety of events in the sport of track and field. And then while I'm coaching track and field and running athleticlab, I operate as the performance director for the North Carolina Courage, taking care of their sports science, and their strength and conditioning, and their speed work, and their warm ups and on field conditioning, and everything that would fall under the realm of performance.
How, how, how can you like? You're only a man and you work with so many teams and so many different stuff at the same time.
It is one I really enjoy what I do. In some cases, I've probably gotten myself into doing too much. My family has oftentimes paid the price for. I've made some sacrifices for me taking on too much, and but I do like what I do. They are very supportive, and I'm also what's known as a short sleeper. So I genetically do not sleep very much. I'm not my body doesn't require me to sleep more than about 5 hours a night. So that's given me an opportunity to kind of almost have an extra work day for compared to many of my peers. And so a kind of combination of events, some of which many people would not really care for, shouldn't be advised to do, but I do like what I do. I do like who I work with. And I work a lot. So that's probably what it comes down to.
Right. So can you talk a little bit more about like your journey in coaching track and field at LSU and how that kind of like help you as a coach?
Sure. So I'll take a little step back from before my time at LSU. I was a track and field athlete myself, Division I level for those who are international listeners, and that's the highest level of collegiate sport in the U.S. But I was kind of a middling, uh, maybe slightly above average track and field athlete myself, but I was really passionate about the sport. I competed at a kind of middling tier university, and then uh, received my master's degree as a graduate assistant coach uh, at that same university where I competed. So I did my undergraduate degree, finished competing, and then went on to coach at that same university in what's called a graduate assistant position, where you do your master's degree and then you're also coaching. Uh, it was a mid major school, meaning that it wasn't one of these schools that maybe the international listeners would have ever heard of. Uh, but I then went on to LSU. So I applied at LSU, and LSU at the time was a really top flight track and field university. And I went there uh, not having ever experienced world class track and field, really. I was a fan of it. I was somewhat familiar with the training process. But when I went there, I started to work with a variety of coaches who were legends in the field. During my 4 years there, we won 6 team national championships. A coach named Boo Schexnader took me under his wing. I worked with him for 3 to 5 hours a day. He gave me a lot of responsibilities. It was through LSU. I made connections with other legendary coaches like Lauren Seagrave and Dan Papp, who subsequently became another huge influence on me. Dan is probably known to many of your listeners for his work with Altus. And this was all long before Altus was ever organized. So I was introduced to, legends of the coaching world in track and field. We had a lot of success. I was immediately got to see what it took to compete at that level, what the level of coaching was, how to manage these high level athletes, etc. It was really eye opening for me, not just to learn the training theory, but also to manage how you manage athletes of this caliber, and how you run a team, not just from the training aspect of it, but the head coach is one of the most successful head coaches in the history of the NCAA, and to see how he handled the team to have perennial success year on year. We were just very successful. Was really eye opening, and I learned a lot of things that I subsequently took to my business, because you could see that this coach, Pat Henry, was excellent at bringing in surrounding himself with a really good staff, people who were as smart or smarter than him, and then letting them do their thing. And I think for anyone that's working in a team environment, whether that's a business team or a sports team, if you are at the top of that team, the head of the pyramid, so to speak, that you can really do a lot if you just surround yourself by really smart, really good people. A lot of people make the mistake of being worried about having those types of people around them because they make them look worse. But the reality is that those people will make you look better, and you'll learn, and everybody will improve. So it just raises the entire level if you can surround yourself by really smart people.
Great. So at that time when you work under like Coach Boo, is he still coaching the jump events?
So Boo is largely retired. I actually just met with him about a week and a half ago. He's no longer at LSU. He is working with a handful of athletes on a private basis, and mostly just consulting now. He was at LSU up until last year and played a huge role in the training of some of their really successful jumpers, most notably Javon Harrison, and handled the weight room programming for most of the team. And they were really successful during those years. But has stepped away this year, and is largely just doing some consulting and coaching education. He, is if you ask anyone in the sport of track and field, he is a legend. In terms of his coaching education, what he's given to the field and the sport, as well as his coaching credentials. He's coached an Olympic silver medalist and multiple NCAA and USA track and field national champions. So he's a guy that has done a lot and has made a dent in the sport, and influenced a lot of people, including myself.
Great. So I kind of want to ask the question for like training, okay?
Yep.
So as a track coach, I know there's like the Charlie Francis like kind of like bring up the short to long approach. So kind of like explain to us what exactly is short to long approach.
Sure. So this is a training theory popularized by Charlie Francis. However, it was not invented by him, and it's used by many track and field coaches, and I think has serves as the periodization format for developing speed. So when we say short to long, it means that we're starting the year training very short sprint repetitions or acceleration. And then as we progress through the year, we're moving towards longer sprint repetitions to where we're actually hitting top speed on some of those. Now, this is contrary to what is oftentimes done in more endurance-biased training programs. In the endurance world, if you were training a long distance runner, or if you were training, I don't know, even many strength programs, you start with a higher volume and then you get shorter, right? So you might do 10 rep sets first, and then do 8 rep sets, and then 6 rep sets, and you get heavier and you reduce the number of reps per set. In the distance running world, what you oftentimes do is run a lot of slow, high volume work early, and then you progress to faster work as the year progresses. Well, when it comes to sprinting, that doesn't make sense. It works with the endurance community because what you're doing is that long to short format is effectively specificity for developing an endurance. So you're starting with longer work and then getting shorter and faster. But in the sprint world, if you're trying to enhance speed, that there are several key things that we need to understand. One is that speed is really only developed through sprinting well. So, and that requires an effort somewhere above 90%, in my opinion. And so doing a lot of volume when the intensity is very low is not going to be very beneficial. Second, we have to get to top speed at some point. And we know that top speed running, sometimes called maximum velocity, is something that is potentially injurious if an athlete isn't ready for it. It's one of the most demanding things you can do in sport, is to run upright sprinting at top speed. You really need to prepare for it. You need to have a good lead in and a progression to it. This isn't the case with distance running, and even with most things you do in the weight room. You don't really have that same likelihood for injury. But with sprinting, we know that we need to get to top speed. We need to address it in the training, but we probably can't do it from day one. So the thought is that, hey, in track and field, in most events, let's say even the 100 meters, these athletes are reaching top speed somewhere around 60 to 70 meters, and then they're actually decelerating. So they're reaching top speed, holding it for about 10 to 20 meters, and then they're decelerating for about 20 meters. So that means in a given race, you have about 60 meters of acceleration, you have about 20 meters of top speed running, and then you have about 20 meters of speed endurance. You're trying to hold on to the speed that you built up. Now, my thinking on this is that even in the shortest event in outdoor track and field, the fastest athletes can't maintain their speed throughout the first 100 meters, through the 100 meters. They can't maintain their speed. They're decelerating. And there's a progression, right? If we want to run the 100 meters, we have to run fast for longer than we can run fast. So we want to, before we can run fast for long, we need to be able to run fast, period, which is top speed. And before we can run fast, period, we need to be able to accelerate really well. So that's the underlying premise of the short to long training philosophy, is that we develop acceleration qualities early so that we can run at top speed really efficiently and safely. And then once we have developed top speed qualities, now we can move to more speed endurance qualities, which is the opposite of what we oftentimes see in the endurance world, where your athletes are running really high volumes and pretty slow and then progressing to faster. But in the sprint world, what I'd suggest is short to long, where we can sprint from day one, but we just have to keep our reps very, very short, maybe 10, 15 meters. And then as the year progresses, the repetition length will increase. Maybe day one, we do 18 repetitions of 10 meters. And then we gradually progress to maybe where we're doing 12 repetitions of 20 meters, and then 8 repetitions of 30 meters. And this progression can be extended over multiple cycles of a year. And then once we've reached 30, 40, 50 meters, now we're approaching the athlete's top speed. And now we can start to work on top speed mechanics and the physical qualities of top speed. So now we might have some of our repetitions be in the 40 to 60 meter range. So they've gotten longer. We started off with 10 meter repetitions, and now we're on 40 to 60 meter repetitions. And then, so that's the idea. We go short to long. And if you have an athlete that needs more speed endurance qualities, now you're going to maybe take some of your repetitions longer than that even. So the idea again is that you can't run fast for long without running fast. You can't run fast without accelerating. So let's develop it in that order. We'll learn to accelerate. We'll learn to run fast. We'll learn to run fast for long. And it's been very effective. There are coaches who do not follow that program at the highest levels of track and field. It's not absolutely necessary, but from my perspective, it's a very logical and a safe way to design speed training programs. And even with my team sport athletes, I follow what is effectively a short to long program. So in the off season, we do very short repetitions, and then we gradually progress the length up to around 30 to 40 meters. And then we'll just stay at 30 to 40 meters. We don't need to keep progressing like, say, a track and field athlete would. But even in that community, I feel like there's a benefit to doing a short to long training progression because it's safe. You're not going to have athletes pull their hamstrings or have other soft tissue related injuries, oftentimes associated with top speed running. And it is very logically sound because the progression is what would be necessary to actually run really fast.
Great. So, does that mean that even when you are training like the track guys, there's gonna be a certain time of the year you just only train acceleration? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way I laid it out is a little bit simplified. Of course, this could be kind of, we could talk about the short to long training periodization plans for hours. There are many ways to do it, and there's so many details and nuance to it. But what I would say is that early on in the year, I'm going to focus almost completely on acceleration qualities. So all the repetitions will be relatively short. Now, the means and the methods that we develop acceleration qualities will differ. And I can talk about that in a little bit, but we won't progress to top speed running for maybe several months, depending on how long that you had with your training plans. So for sure, there will be some period of time where we only do accelerations. What that looks like on a day-to-day basis might be different from day to day, but it would only be in that short realm of acceleration. Now, even when we progress to the top speed running, so once we have gone a couple months, perhaps a couple training cycles of acceleration focused training, and we start to integrate some top speed running, it doesn't mean that we're going to neglect acceleration. So the acceleration qualities will still stay in the training plan throughout the year. Because again, thinking of this logically, you can never outside of contrived situations where there's a high-speed treadmill or you're being towed down the track or you have running down a hill, you can never get to top speed without accelerating maximally. You can never get to top speed without accelerating maximally. So we would never take out acceleration from the training plan, because even when they're ready for top speed, they still have to be able to accelerate really efficiently. So we never want that physical quality, the rehearsal of mechanics to erode or decay at all, because they'll always need it all year long. So acceleration starts in the program and it's present throughout the end of the program. Maximal velocity focus will hop in somewhere in the middle of the training program when they're ready for it and persist through the end. And then speed endurance will come into the program after we've adequately developed top end speed, and then that will stay in through to the end.
I love this. I love this. So, I know in track and field that they have like off season and then there's like indoor season, and after that is outdoor season. So during the indoor season, the 100-meter sprinters or like 200-meter sprinters, they're probably going to be focusing on the 60-meter sprint. So is that is the last part of the off season and the indoor season matches like the period that you only focus on acceleration, and probably the last part of indoor season you're gonna touch on max velocity, and after that, is that the case?
Kind of. So when I have a sprinter, let's use your example, a 100-meter sprinter, 100, 200-meter sprinter. And I basically treat the indoor and outdoor season as two seasons. So we will build up into a peak for the indoor season, and then we will almost restart again. And at the beginning of the outdoor season, we will begin with a focus on acceleration again, and then gradually build up. Now, some people handle it similar maybe to what you said. You could, because the races indoors are shorter, you could have it where you finish the indoor season and your focus is on top speed, because in the 60-meter dash, which is the shortest race of the indoor track and field schedule, is 60 meters is really just acceleration and top speed. There's no speed endurance unless you're a novice or a youth athlete. But then what would happen would be they would finish their indoor season in March, and then in May, they would begin running outdoor track and field, where the shortest distance for outdoor track and field is 100 meters, which does require speed endurance. So there's two ways of handling it. You could start your training in August and with pure acceleration work, do that for 2 months. Then you incorporate top speed, do that for 2 to 4 months. And then you taper for 1 month, and that takes you through the indoor season. And then once the indoor season is done, you could have a little mini cycle of just acceleration, followed by top speed, maybe for a month of each, and then you're into speed endurance. That would be a true two-peak annual cycle. So you'd have indoor season and outdoor season. You'd have two peaking periods. Now, an alternative way of doing it, which is viable, it's not incorrect, would be you train acceleration focused for 3 or 4 months. You train top speed for 2 months or so. That now takes you to your competition peak for indoor season, which is going to occur in March. And then instead of resetting and going back to a focus on acceleration, now you could just continue the progression and just go right into top speed running, or speed endurance, top speed and speed endurance. So both ways can work well. Part of the reason why I like to reset is not just because of the going back a little bit to work on acceleration more, but also because I find to stay in the really, really intense work and the more specific, less general, higher intensity, lower volume work, to stay in that same progression for an extended period of time somewhat stunts their growth, their development. So I think one of the biggest things that can improve performance is actually variance of training plans. So if all they're seeing is this linear progression over time, that they are more likely to get hurt, they're more likely to get injured. So what I like to do is, we start in August, we build up to a peak in March, and then we reset back down before building up again. And this period here, this critical period where we reset, is oftentimes where they see a lot of their gains in performance. And mentally, it's a lot easier on them because they've made a change. Just like, if you imagine eating your favorite food, right? You could eat your favorite food for a while, but after a while, you might get sick of it, right? You might want to change. At least 1 or 2 days a week, you have a change, right? I love sushi and steak. I could alternate sushi and steak every other day and be perfectly fine. But if all I had was sushi every single day, I might eventually get sick of it. I might feel like I want the steak. So this critical period here where we've gone from the high intensity, low volume speed work back down to a focus on acceleration, where maybe it's a little bit more like general prep, a little bit more less specific, a little bit more general, a little bit lower intensity, a little bit higher volume, can really be beneficial. It's the steak matched with the sushi. Both are good. We need to make sure that we balance things out. It keeps athletes healthy. It keeps them engaged with the training process. And I think it leads to a better secondary peak in outdoor season. So you can do it both ways. I've always preferred to do what's called a double peak macro cycle, where you have two peaks within the annual plan. And sometimes you could conceivably even have 3. If you had athletes who are competing internationally outdoors, they might do the domestic calendar and then do the international calendar. So it can be quite difficult. If you look at in an Olympic year, a very high level competitor might start training in August, and they might continue without a break with training and competition all the way through the next September. So there are sometimes at world championship events have been as late as September. So now you're talking about a 13-month training calendar. And in cases like that, it's really important that the athletes didn't just follow this linear progression the whole time, that they had some level of change throughout.
Nice. So, the next thing I want to ask is, like, when you focus on like acceleration, is there a total volume per session you would probably be aiming?
Sure. So my general rule of thumb is around 240 meters of acceleration. Now, there's nothing magical about that. I think you can go a little bit above that, and I think you can go a little bit below that. But this is a value that I found works really well for acceleration related training. Now, I've had acceleration sessions be as short as 120 meters of total volume and as long as around 360 meters of total volume. So that's a pretty decent window or variance of your session. But for the most part, I'm looking at keeping them around 240 meters. So And then generally speaking, what I will do in the course of say a training cycle is I actually keep the total volume the same on a given day. But what I do is I achieve that volume by manipulating the rep length and the number of repetitions. So let's just say, for example, we're going to use 240 meters as our volume for a 4-week block. Now, if I use 240 meters, think of how many ways you can divide that into repetitions. If I really wanted to, I could do 24 repetitions of 10 meters. I generally wouldn't do that many repetitions, but let's say I might start with something like 2 sets of 9 repetitions of 15 meters. 2 times 9 times 15 meters. That's 240 meters. We could then on week 2, let's say we wanted to go from doing 15-meter repetitions to doing 20-meter repetitions. So now I might do 2 sets of 6 repetitions of 20 meters, 240 meters again, but I've made the repetition length a little bit longer. Now, if I wanted to take a next step up and let's say do 25-meter repetitions, now, of course, I can't get to 240 meters, but I can get to 250 meters by doing 10 repetitions of 25 meters or 2 sets of 5 times 25 meters. Now I'm at 250 meters. So I've kept the total volume equidistant. This stays basically the same throughout. But what I've done is I've shifted the proportion of my sprint volume from early phase acceleration to later phase acceleration. So now we're doing reps that are longer. The average velocity of those repetitions is higher, and I'm exposing them to more and more distance at a higher velocity, closer to top speed running, closer to upright running.
Cool. So 240 meters for like acceleration. How about like max velocity or top velocity? Is there like value?
So it is a little bit trickier there because here's the thing. With top speed, as I said, without having a pulley system, without having a downhill grade to run into the top speed, without using a high-speed treadmill, there's no way to get to top speed without accelerating. So you can't get to top speed unless you accelerate maximally or accelerate to maximum speed. So there are a variety of ways that you can get to top speed through unassisted means. So we could do what I call a flying sprint, where we use a sub-maximal acceleration period and eventually arrive at top speed, and then we run 20 meters or so at top speed, right? So sub-maximal period. Let's say, for example, an athlete, if they ran 100%, could reach top speed at 40 meters, okay? So if they run at 100%, they'll reach top speed at 40 meters. And then from there, we can run another 20 meters at top speed. Okay, so that's a 60-meter repetition, of which 20 meters of it, 1/3, was at top speed. But the whole thing was maximal. So we've run 60 meters of maximal sprinting, 40 meters acceleration, 20 meters or 1/3 at top speed. Now, there are other ways to do that. Think about, for example, what happens when you maximally accelerate your car. So anyone who's driven a car and tries to drive it really fast off of the stoplight, what happens to the fuel economy? It goes down. Same thing is true with our efforts. If we try to give a maximal effort on a sprint, the fuel economy goes down. We burn through a lot of our ATP and creatine phosphate. So that means the energetic resources to be able to do these repetitions is very demanding. So what if we take that same athlete and instead of running a maximal 40-meter acceleration, we just give them 45 meters or 50 meters, And instead of going pedal to the metal as hard as you can for 40 meters, we now let them gradually build in to that top speed. That's the same thing as having a gradual acceleration on a car. It's less energetically demanding. Now we've increased the distance, of course, but because we've done that, now perhaps it's maybe we can spend a little bit more time in top speed, or we can do more repetitions at top speed. There are a variety of other ways to get there as well. I'll use methods like what's called a sprint, float, sprint. So in a sprint, float, sprint, we have 3 segments. Segment 1, this is a maximal or near maximal acceleration. Segment 2, this would be what I'd call a float. This is where we are taking our foot off the gas, but not putting it on the brakes. So we want athletes to just feel like they can run fast and relaxed. And then that third and final segment, we use the float section to build directly into a final sprint section. And this allows us, it's very, very demanding, but allows us to teach athletes to run relaxed, but also gets us a long exposure to upright sprinting and top speed running mechanics. And then I've used a variety of other methods as well. I do use towing devices occasionally to get athletes to top speed. I will use wind in our back whenever I have that opportunity. We have used small downhills to get athletes to top speed quicker and with less effort than it would take if they were to do it maximally. But depending on how you get to top speed will vary how many total repetitions you can do and how much total volume you can do. Generally speaking, I'd like for athletes to spend about 100 to 200 meters of total volume at top speed over the course of a week. So 100 to 200 meters of total volume over the course of a week. It might happen in just one session. It might happen in 2 sessions. But the idea here would be that it's that time when they're at 92 to 95+% of their own maximal velocity that counts towards this value. So just because you're running with full intent does not mean you're at 92 to 100% of your max velocity. I need to see you in that range of your individual speed to be able to count towards the total volume that I'm talking about here.
Just to clarify, so 100 to 200 meter of like top velocity means that like the last 20-meter part of the 60-meter run. Am I right?
Correct. Yep, correct.
And
so then you could maybe get in 5 repetitions, or maybe you do maybe you split it over 2 days. Perhaps if you just ran 100 meters, now if you ran 100 meters, now that alone would account for somewhere between 20 and 40 meters of top speed running, or running in that 92+% percentage.
Cool. So as I remember, your facility don't have like 100-meter track, right? It's more, is it 60 or?
It's 60, yep. So we have worked our way around that because we will use a variety of different means to get athletes to top speed more quickly. And what we'll also do is we spend a lot of time outside. So in an ideal world, we can go outside and where the track is not limited, but in the facility, we will use banded assistance. So we'll actually slingshot athletes to top speed. And by doing this, we can get athletes to top speed within about 15 meters. So athletes that are fast enough that it would normally take them around 50 meters to reach top speed, I can get them to top speed in about 15 meters. So they've gone from 50 meters to get to top speed, and I can get them to 15 meters in top speed by using some banded assistance with an A. And so then what's happened is I've made it very easy for them. I've effectively cheated the acceleration process. and they can do more repetitions at top speed because of that. They can spend more time within a given session at top speed.
Cool. So so when it comes to like speed endurance, would you do like is it sort of like programming things like tempo run, or is it like 100-meter 4-out sprint, or like 120-meter, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's so. I would classify speed endurance. I classify speed endurance as anything above about 80 meters. 80 meters, 60 to 80 meters is what I'd call short speed endurance. If you get above 80 meters, it's probably true or proper speed endurance. And then I would take that up until around 150 to 220 meters, depending on how developed your athlete is. For a high level athlete, speed endurance could be done through 220 meters. Now, again, I think we need to focus when talking about speed endurance on the fact that it's speed. So doing longer, slower reps is not speed. It is something else. It's conditioning, it's fitness. So those types of things have a place in the training plan, but are not the same as true speed work. So speed endurance would be something in the realm of like 80 to 200 meters, give or take a little bit, depending on the level of the athlete you're dealing with. Now, the rep distance is not the only variable that you're concerned about, because we need to keep the athletes fresh enough that they can execute at a high level. So if, for example, we did 80-meter repetitions, but we only allowed the athlete 1 or 2 minutes of rest, now the first repetition might be speed endurance, have an element of speed endurance, but the second one would not be speed endurance, because it would they'd already be too fatigued from that first one. So we need to have a lot of rest in between these repetitions to be able to ensure the intensity that we're looking for. There are a couple ways to develop similar metabolic qualities associated with speed endurance, even if you're not running that long. If, for example, you were to run 40 or 50 meters with insufficient recovery in between. So let's say we run 40 meters, rest a minute, run 40 meters, rest a minute, run 40 meters, rest a minute, run 40 meters. So we've done 160 meters and we've rested very little. A minute is probably too short for most people to run that long. Then we would get very similar metabolic stimulus from that workout to a true speed endurance session. It's not ideal, but for those of you that are perhaps training in the winter, or you're trying to get in a speed endurance session and you don't have access to an outdoor track, maybe you just have a hallway that you're running through, or a private training center with a shorter sprint track, you can get similar physical qualities and stimulus if you just shorten the rest. So we have to have the intensity. That's a given. We ideally have the rep length and adequate rest. But if you don't have the adequate length for the repetitions, you can effectively split up the runs. So just taking that example that I just gave you, 160 meter rep would be speed endurance if you run it maximally. Well, if you don't have 160 meters of space to run, you could just chop it into 3 or 4 pieces and then take inadequate rest, and then you get that similar physical stimulus. It's not ideal, but it is something that can be useful to have in your coaching toolbox if you don't have the facilities necessary to run true speed endurance.
So do you implement like things like tempo run, or is these kind of stuff more like recovery?
Yeah, I think tempo runs are great, but I do view them as more recovery. So, for example, I might program sprint work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then tempo work would go on Tuesday and Thursday. And then depending on where we were in the season, the competitive season, Saturday would be another running workout. Sometimes it might be a harder version of tempo, and other times it might be a more speed endurance related session.
Great, great. So the next thing I want to ask is, I saw like a chart you shared on Instagram discussing like how would you like progress like plyometrics. So can you like discuss a little bit about like from basic plyo to like hard plyo, max and 10 plyo,
Yeah,
sorry. How would you program it?
sure. So I think with plyometrics, just like sprinting, you can start on day one as long as your progression is sound and makes sense. I look at four key variables for progressing plyometrics, or kind of thinking of plyometrics and their intensity continuum. One is the height that you fall. So if you fall from a really high height, there's no way around it being a pretty intense form of plyometric. A very low fall, something that you might see on, say, jumping rope, skipping rope, that's pretty low intensity. It can be sustained for a long period of time. It's very safe. Something where you fall from a very high height, like a box jump, that's pretty difficult to do with any volume, and is quite challenging for most athletes to do effectively without a significant progression. So the first thing that I would look at is like the jump height or the fall height. And then the second thing I would look at is are they moving right, left, forward, backward? If they're moving at all, then the faster they're moving, whether it's laterally or forward or maybe even backward, the more intense it is. And then the third thing would be the number of contact points. Is it double leg? Is it single leg? Is it double leg with what I'd call a asymmetrical landing, like a lunge jump? Is it double leg with a temporally asymmetrical, so kind of a skipping action, 1 foot contacts, then the next foot contacts before takeoff? Or is it, and then that, in each one of, I would say the most intense is probably single leg. And then also double leg has the potential to be very high, but oftentimes is not if all the other variables are lower. And then the fourth thing to consider would be how compliant are you at landing? If you're really compliant, you absorb a lot of the impact forces, makes it a little bit easier to handle that. So in general, what I'd say is that we start with things like double leg contacts, relatively low landing, relatively low fall heights, and a pretty compliant contact. And then we progress over time to things where the athletes are very stiff on the landing, that maybe we're doing some single leg landings, maybe we are doing some falls from very amplified heights. So maybe we're doing depth drops or depth jumps. And we just progress using these four variables over time. And we don't have to add weight. We don't have to increase the volume significantly. As long as we're progressing along this continuum of these four variables, we can ensure that the athletes will have a safe and effective progression.
Great. So last question before I let you go, okay? So I know there's like a force velocity curve, like people try to implement that into our training, but when it comes to like sprinting or like let's say like long jump or like high jump, there's like a minimum ground contact time, probably like 0.12 to 0.18, and there's gonna be like 4 to 5 like the vertical force is probably be like 4 to 5 times body weight. So how does that fit in like the force velocity curves? And should we still be following that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think right now the research is not conclusive on force velocity profiling for athletes. I think that we need to be really careful about reading too much into using force velocity profiling for athletes. In theory, it works very well, but force velocity is not the same as running speed. So we see people who have maximized their force velocity profile, but have not improved their speed. So that tells you right away there's a disconnect. I do use the force velocity continuum, the wave, if you will, that shows that we have concentric strength, isometric strength is a little bit stronger, and then eccentric strength is must be performed at high speeds, at high loads. I do use that as an underpinning foundation of my training philosophy, but I'm a little hesitant to try to create really detailed profiles for an athlete because I don't think the evidence suggests that it works. When I first, or a couple of years back, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I actually did experiment and tried to create force velocity profiles for athletes using a timing system as well as some jump tests, and it wasn't very effective for me. I'm not sure if this is because I didn't know enough at the time, but all of the research that I've seen since then suggests that we don't know enough to make that be a huge part of our training profile. Now, as you said, even on a jump contact, the ground contact times are around 0.12 to 0.18 seconds. On a sprint, there may be half of that, as short as 0.08 of a second. And almost nothing you're going to do in the gym will replicate those types of force production, the rate of force production, time to peak force production. Nothing you'll do in the gym will replicate that. So instead of thinking of it in terms of like, here's this continuum and we can place everything, meaning the gym, the plyometrics, the sprint work, somewhere on that continuum, really some things are going to be confined to certain parts on the force velocity continuum, meaning like the weight room is pretty much largely going to operate on the concentric strength side of the force velocity continuum and maybe a little bit veer into the eccentric side of it. But it's not probably your best tool for developing the really fast eccentric qualities. Meanwhile, sprinting is going to be hard pressed to operate outside of the left side of the force velocity continuum. It's very, very eccentric dominant. It's very, very rate of force development dominant. So instead of thinking of it as like each element has a place equally on this entire continuum, instead I like to think of it as we can place, there are certain tools for the job, and some tools don't work for certain jobs, right? Sprinting is not going to be your best tool to develop maximum strength, but the weight room is going to be your best tool for developing maximum strength. So figure out which tool fits depending on where you're trying to train on the force velocity continuum, and then use the appropriate tool for the job. As I said, I'm still hesitant to create very detailed force velocity profiles for athletes or to design training programs around an individual athlete's force velocity profile, because while it looks like it makes sense, the evidence doesn't suggest that it makes a difference in terms of the training outcomes right now. And in fact, from what I've seen and heard, a lot of individuals have used it with no or negative effect.
Cool. So last thing, okay? I really enjoy our last conversation. I really love this one, learn a lot. And always a huge fan of your work, man. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
So I have fallen off a little bit in terms of my social media use, but I'm trying to get back into it. I have to find the time really to do it, but I probably most active on Instagram at mikeyoungphd. I do have a coaching education course called the athleticlab Coaching Academy that myself and some really smart people have contributed to. It goes into things that we've talked about on this podcast, as well as many other periodization elements and strength training, best practices and plyometrics, etc. That's a 3-level or 3-phase course. And in fact, the first time I met you, I believe I was in Taiwan for that course. Level 1 is now completely available online and can be taken anywhere in the world. Level 2 and 3 are in-person courses. So I'm really passionate about coaching education. I have a large body of information out there, whether it's on my old websites, Elite Track, or podcasts or YouTube channels that you can probably just find by Googling my name. But Instagram and the Coaching Academy is where I've been spending the bulk of my coaching education efforts over the last couple of years.
Great. Appreciate that, man.
Thank you, Eric.